Lots of other headlines to get across as well. Of course, we'll talk to Tony Abbott, we'll talk to Moira Adeyemi, and a whole lot more. We'll cross to Jerusalem, speak with Rita Panahi. But to get across the headlines, I'm joined now by Daily Telegraph journalist James Willis and Senior Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre, Nick Cater. Welcome to you both. I've got to start again with this issue of the Prime Minister and lack of leadership, growing anti-Semitism in Australia. It took him days and days to call out that act of terrorism in Melbourne. He took 4 days then to get to the synagogue. We've obviously had what I thought was a change in his rhetoric, certainly in how he appeared yesterday, Nick Cater. But then overnight, yet again, we've got a fresh blow to the Jewish community in Australia. We have voted against Israel, and the Prime Minister wants Jews to believe he's on their side. Nick, I just think he's a hollow man, and this is about votes in Western Sydney and kowtowing to the Greens.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought his comments were heartfelt yesterday in response to the violence there, or the attacks in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. But look, this just, it just puts the kibosh on it, doesn't it? Because we know that an unconditional and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, without seeking to disarm Hamas or without insisting on the release of the hostages, that's a victory for Hamas. That's a victory for the terrorists. And the notion that the Albanese government seems to be pursuing, that we can have a two-state solution, get real. The biggest obstacle to a two-state solution right now is Iran and its proxies. And like the United States under Trump, we need to be focusing on Iran and not getting caught up with these desperate cries for a peace in Gaza. That's not the issue. The issue is dealing with the bigger players that are getting in the way of a truly peaceful solution in that region.
James, today the PM stood with the PNG Prime Minister James Marape. He announced $600 million for an NRL club up that way. Considering where we are in Australia with these anti-Semitic attacks on the rise, cost of living pressures, all the other grim statistics in terms of our budget and more, I just thought that, look, $600 million to a foreign country for a footy team, it just looked and sounded tone deaf to me.
Well, Peter, I think there's no doubt that the Prime Minister was certainly keen for a distraction after a disastrous last week, and to go into a rugby league field and be discussing this major announcement, something that, in fairness, has been in the works for quite some time, but it was certainly a good distraction away from some of the negative headlines he's had in the last few days. Look, it's a really interesting deal because Peter Dutton has made a very sensible point today that he largely supports the idea of doing more with PNG, and he thinks it's a very important strategic step. But this kind of money over 10 years, whether it be for rugby league, whether it be for anything, deserves proper scrutiny and auditing. We give a lot of money to PNG already. I think most Australians would have absolutely no idea where it goes. It certainly, in fairness, and very sadly, doesn't go to improve their standard of living in places like Port Moresby. But this money is ultimately seen as a very strategic step. There's apparently a China clause, which means that if PNG does a deal with China anytime in the next 10 years, the whole thing can be ripped up. Reading the comments today, there's a lot of rugby league fans that are a little bit doubtful about how it's all going to work. I think there's a lot to work out here. They're going to have to convince players to live in PNG. They're talking about tax-free salaries. They're going to have to build them a giant compound. There's no issue with fans. PNG's got a massive rugby league audience. But I'm very keen, like Peter Dutton, to understand where this money over the next 10 years actually goes. But certainly for rugby league, and Peter Volandi's the boss, they've played a blinder because it's money in the bank and they get another team as a result, which is better for their broadcast deal.
Mark my words, when the Prime Minister eventually leaves office, he'll be the chairman of a rugby league club, or he'll be on the NRL Commission. This is the way this stuff works. Let's go to some comments made on ABC Radio. This was an exchange, Nick Cater, about anti-Semitic vandalism in Sydney. It's raised a fair few eyebrows. Have a listen.
Just on your wording in your statements this morning, what's your reasoning for branding the attack anti-Semitic and not anti-Israel? How do you make a distinction?
I mean, I think we would have to be willful at this point to turn a blind eye to that sequence of event and suggest it's anything other than an anti-Semitic attack.
So if you're calling it anti-Semitic rather than just a political anti-Israel statement, you've been in public life a long time. Would you say anti-Semitism is at an all-time high in your experience?
Yes, I would.
Nick Cater.
It's perverse, isn't it, Peter? It is absolutely perverse. I mean, so it's okay. So it's a legitimate form of political statement, is it, to go and torch cars and put obscene graffiti on people's houses in a peaceful, law-abiding suburb like Vaucluse? That's okay now, is it? That's just a political statement. This guy cannot be for real. I gather he's the fill-in presenter on that program. Let's hope he never gets another gig there, because this just, it is just, well, it is frustrating to say the least, but I think deeply offensive, really, if we think about it.
There's a Westpac report out today that says Australia's about to embark on a spending spree of borrowed money, I might add, $650 billion. Money, of course, remind people at home, just like your mortgage, that has to be paid back, that we pay interest on. Famously, as Kerry Packer said, I wouldn't be that worried if you were spending it well, but you spend it terribly, he used to tell government. Look at some of the things that we're wasting money on. This is federal government waste. $650,000 spent on dance performances and other things. In our embassy in the United States, this is, of course, where our former PM, Kevin Rudd, is ambassador. We spent close to $1 million on just 5 pieces of artwork. James, we've got pensioners who can't pay their power bill, and Rudd wants $1 million worth of art to look at on his walls. I just think this is outrageous.
Yeah, and you've got these well-paid bureaucrats all over the world in different consulates, different embassies that are living it up while you and I are struggling like everyone else is back home. I think it's shameful money, whether it is linked to Kevin Rudd or not. There is no suggestion Kevin Rudd purchased them himself, but they are being hung in the embassy that Kevin Rudd is in Washington. But it's a terrible waste of money. There's musical instruments purchased as well, hundreds of thousands of dollars of art, dance performances. And I think when the public service, it was recently revealed that we've spent another $5 billion a year on the public service. Annual wage bill for the public service, about $36 billion now, 350,000 Commonwealth public servants alone. They're all allowed to flexibly work from home full time. Honestly, these people, more and more by the day, are showing themselves to be out of touch. And if spending that much on artwork and other things is not the best example of that, I don't know what is.
I'll leave it there, gentlemen. I think you're absolutely spot on. Have a lovely Christmas, both of you. I've loved having you on the program throughout the year, and I look forward to your company again next year.